After the sorrow of the default, after the long shadow that fell across the second garden, there remained on Urantia a quiet and stubborn faith that the divine plan had not been abandoned. Adam and Eve had failed in part, but they had not failed in purpose. Their children grew into adulthood under the weight of a broken promise and the strange dignity of a mission unfinished. Among those children was Adamson, the firstborn son. And unlike those who would later be taken away to the system worlds, Adamson stayed. He grew up inside the tension that defined early post-default Urantia, the presence of higher ideals and the pressure of a confused planet. He saw how the violet inheritance could be diluted, mocked, misunderstood, or misused. He watched leaders rise and fall, families fracture, and the human struggle continue with little outward sign that the garden had ever been meant to change the world. And then something older began to call him. There were legends, held quietly in the memory of Van and Amadon and preserved among the more faithful lines, of a highland refuge to the north, a place that remembered, a region where remnants of the earlier planetary stories still lingered. Adamson's heart turned toward that rumor like iron toward a magnet. He was not merely curious, he was compelled, as though the planet itself still held a hidden assignment for him. So Adamson left the second garden and went north. It was not a simple journey. The distances were great, and the world beyond the garden was not a garden at all. It was a living mixture of tribal humanity, nodite remnants, and older Andonic stocks scattered across hard country. Yet Adamson persisted, and he did not go alone. A small company chose to follow him, a deliberate band of seekers and builders who believed there was still a future for the Violet mission on Urantia. They traveled for years. When they finally reached the highland region east of the southern shore of the Caspian Sea, near the Kopet Dagh mountain belt and the fertile margins that border the harsher lands, Adamson found more than a location. He found a living thread of the planet's earlier history. And there, he encountered the woman who would define his destiny, and through him shape a long chapter of Urantia's hidden development. Her name was Ratta. She claimed to be the last pure-line descendant of the prince's staff, a surviving flower of an old and nearly vanished lineage. Whether others believed it fully at first or not, Adamson recognized something in her that matched the gravity of the moment. Her mind carried a different kind of memory. Her presence carried a kind of continuity. Where Adamson brought the violet strain and the dream of a renewed world, Ratta brought the deep roots of earlier planetary administration, a residue of discipline and instruction that had been preserved through hardship and time. Their union was not merely romantic. It was strategic in the highest sense of the word, a joining of two streams that had once been meant to serve the planet together. They married, and from them came an astonishing family. The Urantia Book describes them as having 67 children, an expanding household that became a tribe, then a people, then the seed of a civilization. But the story does not stop at a large family. The book makes a claim that changes everything about how the Adamsonites should be understood. Every fourth child, it says, was of a unique order. Not merely gifted, not merely brilliant, unique in kind, often invisible, a class of offspring that did not fit ordinary categories of moral life. Adamson and Ratta recognized what they were dealing with, and they did not treat these children as curiosities or accidents. They organized them, they paired them, and from their union came the secondary order of Midwayers, a vast core of helpers that multiplied into almost 2,000 within a century. In this way, the Adamsonite story becomes more than a racial or cultural narrative. It becomes an administrative and planetary narrative, a story of unseen assistance, of an invisible workforce dedicated to the preservation and advancement of higher truth on a confused world. With such helpers, the Adamsonites could do what many other peoples could not. They could sustain continuity. They could carry forward lessons over generations without losing the thread. They could preserve traditions and apply discipline in ways that resisted the usual decay of culture. They could build, teach, organize, and recover from shocks. Their headquarters became a northern center of the Violet legacy, distinct from the Adamite center in Mesopotamia. For thousands of years, the Adamsonites maintained a high culture. The Urantia Book frames their civilization as enduring for nearly 7,000 years from the time of Adamson and Ratta. In the long timescales of early humanity, that is not a brief golden age. That is a sustained experiment in preserving higher standards across a turbulent epoch. Their society carried ideals of order, advanced living, and elevated teaching, aided by those extraordinary secondary midwayers and supported by the blending of two historic lineages. Yet even this culture did not remain pure. Time always demands mixing. Border peoples intermarry. New conditions press in. The Adamsonites became admixed with neighboring Nodites and Andonites, and the book says they were numbered among the mighty men of old. That phrase is more than a compliment. It is a marker that their presence became part of broader human legend. Their strength and stature and leadership became remembered, retold, and reshaped into myth. And as their culture diversified, different centers and waves of development arose among their descendants. The book describes 4 distinct cultures arising in the Adamsonite region over time, fostered by different groups of Adamson's posterity. It is as though the original impulse of Adamson and Ratta kept throwing off new attempts at civilization, each shaped by the pressures and opportunities of its era. Some of these descendants moved. They did not stay confined to the Caspian highlands. They were part of the larger story of migrations that the Urantia Book attributes to the mixed Andite expansions and the spreading of post-Adamic influences across Eurasia. The Adamsonite story, therefore, is not a closed circle. It is a river that sends tributaries into many lands. One of the most dramatic of these tributaries flows toward Greece. The Urantia Book describes a movement in which a group of tall descendants of Adamson traveled from island to island into the Greek peninsula, led by a man named Sato, described as a direct descendant of Adamson and Ratta. This group is presented as selected and superior, a final flowering of a particular Adamsonite civilization stream. The book even gives the number, 375, as though it wants the reader to see this not as vague legend, but as a deliberate transplanting of a people. In the book's framing, this migration becomes part of the hidden ancestry behind the Greek genius, the art, the myth-making, the cultural radiance, not as a denial of Greek creativity, but as a suggested root beneath it. The old Greek stories of divine ancestry, the sense that heroes were born from gods, are interpreted as echoes of a dim and transmuted memory that a higher lineage once entered their world. Another tributary flows into language itself. The Urantia Book makes the striking claim that the so-called Aryan mother tongue formed in Turkestan through a blending that included the language of the Adamsonites. The idea is that as Andonic dialects, Adamsonite speech, and later Andite influences mixed, a linguistic foundation emerged that spread across large regions, giving modern Occidental languages a family resemblance. Whether one reads this as literal history, symbolic framing, or revelatory interpretation, the book places Adamsonites as contributors, not only to blood and culture, but to the very patterns of human speech. And there is even a technological detail, small but vivid, like a nail that pins the story into the everyday world. The Urantia Book attributes the discovery of bronze, the blending of copper with tin, to an Adamsonite of Turkestan, whose copper mine lay beside a deposit of tin. It is a simple image, a miner, a workshop, an experiment, a spark of insight.
Yet it symbolizes what the Adamsonites represent throughout the narrative: a people positioned at crossroads, a people whose gifts expressed themselves in practical advances as well as spiritual ideals. Over time, the Adamsonite identity becomes less about a single isolated tribe and more about a spreading legacy.
Some lines moved north and west into Europe, mingling with later Andite waves. Others became part of the great movements that the book connects with early Indo-European expansions. Their distinctive culture diluted, but their contributions persisted, sometimes openly, sometimes as latent tendencies that later awakened in new civilizations. And behind it all, like a quiet choir in the unseen, remained the secondary Midwayers. The book's implication is that the Adamsonite experiment was not only about visible history, it was about planetary continuity, about keeping alive, through confusion and collapse, some remnant of higher truth and higher order, so that later ages would not be forced to begin from nothing. So the Adamsonites stand in the Urantia Book as a unique bridge, a bridge between Adam and Eve's interrupted mission and the long human climb that followed, a bridge between the prince's early administration and the later world religions and civilizations, a bridge between the visible struggle of tribes and the invisible labor of helpers who work in the background of planetary affairs. They are not presented as perfect. They mix, they decline, they fragment, they migrate. But their story carries a persistent theme. Even on a world where the plan was delayed, something of the plan kept moving. Not always in the spotlight, often in the highlands, in hidden centers, in small selected groups, in family lines, in language, in tools, in myths, and in the quiet influence of advanced ideals that outlive the people who first carried them.